type space. But as a result of the stage going to one side, which I know spelt out all sorts of awful problems with sight lines, acoustics and all the practical things that you associate with the venue, I think was a strength in future years anyway, when it became, if you like, the hallucienda.
Factory were on a decadent late 1980s high and in the mood for expansion of their record department and their urban planning operation. They launched the Factory Classical imprint, with no concern that some discs would only sell hundreds, and they opened the Dry Bar in 1989 in another previously neglected area of the city.
When we started looking at premises for what became Dry, they found this former furniture showroom on Oldham Street, which was really run down in the same way that Whitworth Street West was when they took the building for the Hacienda. And the kind of logistics and the ergonomics and the planning of that thing would be thought through in the early stages, rather than a purely intuitive approach, which is what happened with the Hacienda. And it was the first bar of its kind in Manchester. It was the first bar of its kind in the United Kingdom, I believe, and it seems to have been responsible for what became known as the dreadful, horrific description of designer bars, for which I think I may have some responsibility, and I'm really, really sorry.
The motion of fashion and trend put Wilson in control of his own history-making. He materialises as the man who knows how to anticipate and exploit new movements when the Happy Mondays appear on the same top of the pops as the Stone Roses. Paul Ryder.
Looking back on it, I wish sometimes I was 12 years old and kind of watching that seminal Top of the Pops with the Mondays and the Roses. I wish I would have watched it. It all seemed to happen overnight, but, the Roses and the Mondays and the Inspirals was all together in a band 2 and 3 years before it kind of exploded. So it was kind of just normal life, it was just everyday life to us.
For a month or two, they are the two biggest bands in the world, and Wilson naturally would claim that it was his prized Mondays who were the biggest.
The guys that used to make the Mondays videos, the Bailey brothers, who are they are from Newcastle, but they're kind of like Manchester's adopted sons. They've been there like 20-odd years. And I think it was Keith came up with Manchester.
The world went Manchester mad, and lo, Manchester became Madchester. In the middle of this madness, Wilson continued his other life as increasingly unlikely Granada television personality, still using his TV position to support and encourage local talent. He gave the Stone Roses their first TV appearance on The Other Side of Midnight, and he would plug the Mondays whenever he could.
Because we came from Salford and he came from Salford, and a couple of Joy Division New Order came from Salford, it was like a little connection we had going. But like he championed us. Sometimes it got really embarrassing. It's like, God, Tony, you can't say that. You can't big us up that much. I can't walk on water, and neither can our kid. But it was brilliant, But he did big us up a lot, and it was like, hard to live up to sometimes.
Martin Hannett had returned to Factory to help with the sound of the Happy Mondays, but was dead by the end of the 1980s. New Order began to drift apart, with various members working on side projects, including Bernard Sumner's electronic project with the Smiths' Johnny Marr, described by Peter Hook as New Order without my bass. The Hacienda shuts down in 1992, now as much an attraction for Manchester's thriving drug, gun and gang culture as much as for uncompromising pleasure seekers. Wilson meets new love Yvette Livesey.
By accident, Tony and I met, actually. I'd been modelling and came back home and decided I want to change my life, and realised that if I was going to do it, I had to do it then. Otherwise, I sort of wouldn't be able to retrain. I think I was like 20, 21. And a friend of mine was going to show me around the Granada studios because I fancied TV presenting, because I'd been doing a little bit of it anyway. And that friend of mine couldn't turn up for the day and asked if Tony would show me around. And that was the beginning of the end, really. It was kind of love at first sight, and we put it off for 2 years and sort of kept just adoring each other for about 2 years, and then finally realised we had to be together, and that was it, really.
And together they hatched new plans for the city and its place in the music business. They came up with the idea of In the City, a music business conference that could reflect Manchester's new stature as leading music city.
In 1990, Tony and I went to Midem together, which is sort of the equivalent of what In the City is now, but in the south of France. And I sort of said to him, what on earth is a music convention doing in France, in Cannes, in the middle of January? Why isn't there one of these in Britain? And at the time he said, I've no idea. And I said, well, if I set it up, will you help me? And he said yes. So, but he said, you also need two other people. He sort of said, I represent the indie side of the music industry, and you actually need someone who represents the major side of it. So he introduced me to Andy Dodd and Elliot Rashman, who are Simply Red's management. So we all had equal partnership, but I ran it.
Still dreaming of a factory future where he would run an international arts and entertainment empire distributing the imagination of Manchester around the world, Wilson buys yet another building and excitedly sets up a Ben Kelly-designed headquarters for the label.
The headquarters building was an attempt for Factory to drag itself screaming and kicking into the reality of the business world. You know, that it was going to be the centre for distribution, proper business meetings, a boardroom, everything that they'd never had before. And I do remember, I'll never ever forget, one day, it was covered in scaffolding as a building. I was up there on a site visit with hard hats, all the rest of it, and Tony donned a hard hat and up we went. And it was the further we climbed up the scaffolding, the more hysterical Tony was getting, and the more he realised this thing that was emerging was possibly over and above their means. And the hysteria turned to crazy laughter, and he just said, spend more, you know, in a kind of hysterical manner. And I think he realised that, well, we've gone so far, why stop now, kind of thing. Let's gold plate it.
Here's Yvette Livesey.
When we first met, they had just built the new factory offices in Manchester, so everything was expanding. And then obviously there was the property collapse, and, you know, it all went belly up from there on inwards. In a funny way, I'd set up in the city, because I also realised that if we were going to be together, the only way we could actually probably see each other was for us to work together. So I'd set up in the city. So suddenly Tony started turning up to my offices and kind of hanging out and playing solitaire and stuff. So it was all sort of a bit peculiar, but also it was good for Tony, I think, as well, and for both of us, because it kept Tony in the music industry, you know, while Factory was going, so there was something he could focus his attentions on.
All that made Factory unique and enterprising as a finder and nurturer of innovative ideas made them useless as a business. Factory believed in artistic statements more than bank statements. One by one, the classic Factory acts, including a certain ratio, would leave. Martin Moskrop.
We got wind that things weren't quite right at Factory financially, and they were in financial difficulties, and they did owe us some money, Factory. So what we did was we went into the Factory offices and confiscated all our masters. So when Factory finally did go bust shortly after that, and the receivers came in, there was no ACR masters there. So London Records never ever gained ownership of any ACR material, and we've owned all our back catalogue.
Factory did attempt to modify their ethics after it became more and more obvious that what seemed right in the years following punk, in the fantasy of a label as dreamt up by Wilson and Erasmus, was less and less practical when it came to dealing with careers and lives and egos. Stephen Morris from Joy Division and New Order.
The moral issues or whatever that were the foundations of Factory indirectly sort of led to his downfall, and also our lack of enthusiasm, if that's the word for it, because it was, hey, no contracts with the bands, which in the early days, it's really right on, man, innit? Don't have a contract. So OMD went to Virgin, the Railway Children went to Virgin. What were they? An A&R department for Virgin? But ultimately, because we were sort of mates, you don't like doing the dirty on your mates, really.
Factory were never set up by the original five as a profit-seeking company that was dedicated to money above dreams. The goal was to capture a certain spirit and find ways to get it to those interested in particularly novel ways of expressing radical ideas. In that sense, it was amazing that Factory lasted so long. Its real intention was to provoke change, and to that end it was a total success, consisting of the kind of talents almost too brilliant to run something as ultimately mundane as a record company.
Factory's great ethics and stuff, at certain points, certain ones went by the wayside, like the no press, no promotion we gave up on in '85 because we realised we'd become a dinosaur and we were actually not doing service to our groups. The not campaigning an album, you know, we turned around when we did True Faith and Substance and found we enjoyed it, so we did it from then onwards. Not having contracts. When, you know, Railway Children left us, 52nd Street left us, and then when James left us, it was like, well, hold on, you can't keep building a band and then they leave you. It's like, you know, to have any fun here, we should have more than one band. We shouldn't be just New Order and rely on them so much.
Paul Ryder.
I think we was the only band to have a contract with Factory. Eventually, we'd already put like 3 12-inch singles out and a couple of albums, and then Tony decided that he wanted a contract with us. He'd lost a few bands,